Elden Ring is full of flashy weapons with cinematographic Ashes of War and truckloads of damage that make you feel like an absolute god. And what's more satisfying than obliterating some nerd with a single punch or landing a crazy combo that deletes their entire health bar in one string of attacks? But much of Elden Ring's player base has been playing Dark Souls games for over a decade at this point. And despite what major cognitive decline we might have suffered as a result of that, it's gonna take a lot more than some silly little one-shot build to catch them off guard. I stand corrected. But eventually, you're gonna run into some seasoned Dark Souls players, who you can often find in the wild as they wiggle and scuttle across the maps with all their silly little texts. And as your power fantasy of being the Elden Lord slowly starts to shatter with each loss to the same carpet-wearing floor humper with a big-ass chopsticks, you'll have to start to adapt. Elden Ring has a rather thriving competitive scene for its PvP, with about 3,000 players in the community Discord, with frequent tournaments being hosted on a monthly basis by people like Owen Trilson and Kai Dojo. And over the course of the past 4 years, we've seen a lot of diversity. In 2022, we had the Goblin Stepping Uggs pokers until they were eventually nerfed in patch 1.07. In 2023 came the rise of PSGS, or Power Stance Great Spears, a meta which lasted until patch 1.12. In 2024, we were brought the evolution of the Hal Axe, a crucial update that made the offhand hand axe one of the best weapons in the game. And in 2025, we finally went back to our roots with a curved sword reigning supreme with Scam Shear, giving everybody PTSD from the old days of Dark Souls 3, and it's remained top tier up until this day. But about 9 months ago, we had a blip in the matrix and a player by the name of Luber won a major tournament with nothing more than a dagger. But most people would have just written this off as nothing more than a fluke. Luber has one of the most insane win streaks in Dark Souls history, having only ever lost a single round in all the tournaments he's competed in. So the fact that he was able to win with nothing but a dagger really came as no surprise. And it wasn't until recently that people finally came to understand just how fucking broken daggers really are. My name's Rust. I'm a Soulsborne content creator with an emphasis on PvP. Daggers are one of the most underrated top-tier setups in Elden Ring, of which there are 3 different variations of the moveset, each with their own special twist that makes them unique. And in this video, I'm going to teach you all that there is to know about the dagger as a weapon class. So be sure to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you found this information helpful to you at all, or if you're just more confused than ever. The dagger can be divided into 4 categories. All daggers have the same moveset on their light attack chains and with their offhand moveset. What makes them distinct is their various heavy attacks. The first being the standard dagger moveset, which comes with a slashing heavy attack that swipes across in one wide arc. This weapon is best used one-handed, being vastly superior than its two-handed counterpart. The heavy attack on this weapon comes out at frame 13 and deals over 133 poise damage, meaning that it breaks max passive poise and no amount of armor will ever stop you from getting stunned by this attack. The follow-up R2 then comes out at only frame 12, and is fast enough to keep priority against even hyper armor setups, meaning that the opponent won't be able to mash out of hit stun between these attacks no matter what. Other daggers that share this moveset are things like Reduvia, the Quesadilla, and Wakizashi. The next category of dagger uses the Misery Chord moveset with a thrusting heavy attack, which works well being either one or two-handed. The heavy attacks on this moveset come out at just frame 13, can break max passive poise, and have an insane amount of root motion. Root motion just refers to the amount of distance that the attack causes your character to travel. While daggers might be pretty short, the amount of distance that it causes your character to move forward lets you outspace even the longest weapons in the game, like halberds and great katanas. However, the follow-up heavy attack is horribly pathetic, being at either frame 19 or 21 frames slow. So, this dagger has to make use of a few extra techs and has a higher skill floor in order to make it really viable. But when it's used effectively, this is probably the most fun type of dagger to use out of all of these options. Other daggers that share this moveset are things like the Glintstone Kriss, the Scorpion Stinger, and most notably the main Gouch. Then there's the Earthsteel moveset with the double slashing heavy attacks. With these daggers, the poise damage on the heavy attack is divided between the first and second hit, where the one-handed moveset deals 70 poise damage on each hit of the heavy attack, and the two-handed moveset deals 79 poise damage on each hit. The initial hit of the R2 comes out at frame 13, but the second takes 16 frames, making it actually fairly slow at confirming a stagger against an opponent. Similar to the single slashing dagger moveset, the one-handed version of this weapon has a follow-up R2 which can keep prio against mash. There's a caveat to this that requires a bit more of a thorough explanation, but I'll get to that when I get to that section of the video. The main attraction of this particular class of dagger is that it does ludicrous amounts of damage, and on the right build, you can put someone in the dirt in as little as 3 or 4 hits. Daggers that fall into this category are things like the Fire Knight's Short Sword, the Blade of Calling, and the Black Knife. The fourth category that I'll be covering in this video is really just the offhand moveset provided by daggers. While all daggers share this particular moveset, it's a topic that really deserves its own spotlight. You can legitimately win fights with nothing but an offhand dagger, and in certain matchups, there's absolutely no reason why you should ever lose a fight with it. So let's talk about it. The offhand dagger's light attack comes out at frame 11, being the fastest offhand attack in the game, with the shortest amount of recovery at only 7 frames after the hitbox generates. It only does 40.5 poise damage on the first swing, but it deals 63 poise damage on the follow-up hits. Because this doesn't naturally break max poise, you need to get comfortable with poise counting in order to make this weapon effective. Poise counting just refers to the process of keeping tabs on the amount of poise health that your opponent has. Let's say that your opponent is running 88 poise, which is pretty standard in today's meta. In order to break their poise, you either need to land 3 hits with the first L1 of your offhand dagger for a total of 121.5 poise damage, or a combination of the first and second hit of the offhand dagger for a total of 103.5 poise damage. Upon causing a poise break, you can safely go for another follow-up attack afterwards, since the stun from your attack will be enough to prevent them from successfully mashing into you. This lets you re-chip their poise with another hit for 63 poise damage, meaning that if they have under 100 poise, then they'll be poise broken by your next attack. You can then stun them again, and then get your safe chip with another backswing, and then continue to rinse and repeat this cycle of getting 2 hits every interaction. This gets a little bit more complicated as players start to throw on higher amounts of poise. With 104 poise or higher, it will require you to land a minimum of 3 hits with any of your Offdagger attacks. This means that it can take a significant amount of time before you ever get to the stage where you can guarantee a poise break against that opponent. However, this only applies if the opponent doesn't have access to Hyper Armor. Hyper Armor, or active poise, is additional poise that you're given during Hyper Armor frames of specific attacks. During Hyper Armor frames, additional poise is added to your poise health, relative to the weapon that you're using, where bigger weapons contribute more poise. With a Hyper Armor weapon, the opponent's poise will be almost fully reset every time they swing their weapon, meaning that as long as they keep swinging, they will never be staggered by an offhand dagger. However, these heavy weapons with innate Hyper Armor have a major flaw. They're slow as shit. In Elden Ring, it's hard to say that there's any such thing as a quote-unquote hard counter to any particular setup, since if you just play better than the other guy, then you're generally going to win. But in the case of the offhand dagger, there's a few matchups that you really should never lose. As I said, Hyper Armor provides an increased amount of passive poise during Hyper Armor frames of an attack. Trying to punish between these attacks is kind of a pain in the ass, and there's generally only a window of a few frames between consecutive attacks where a punish is even possible, and if the other guy just keeps swinging, then you're probably going to end up trading into Hyper Armor one way or the other. But Offdaggers have exceptional recovery speed on their attacks, and after outspacing an opponent's attack with any medium or heavy class weapon, then he can always get in a safe hit for free before they can go for a follow-up swing. We're talking greatswords, curved greatswords, scythes, halberds, colossals, and anything in between. However, this punish will work a little different depending on the matchup, where against medium class weapons like greatswords, you really can't roll into their attacks and be able to safely get off a hit. That is, unless they're going with an attack that has high commitment. Attacks like running, jumping, and heavy attacks will provide you with a long enough window in order to squeeze in a punish and still have plenty of time to be able to get away. but that doesn't quite work for the standing R1 chain. Instead, you gotta play like a chicken shit and bait out their attacks so that you can punish their whiffs. But for every whiff that you're able to outspace, you get a free punish. This makes for a pretty slow gameplay loop of pecking away at a person's health bar while trying desperately to avoid making a mistake. So pairing this with a strong weapon like a halberd or a colossus sword in your main hand goes a long way in making that matchup a lot easier. But we'll get into weapon pairings a little later. The matchup for an offhand dagger into a medium weapon with hyper armor is pretty much always in favor of the dagger player, but it requires good roll discipline and spacing in order to pull it off. But against things like colossal swords, it gets a little stupid. In this matchup, if you manage to outspace your opponent's attack, then you can freely go for 2 swings with the offhand dagger. But even if you're forced to roll, then there's no follow-up attack that the colossal sword user can go for, which will prevent you from getting free chipped with a swipe with your offhand dagger. This lets you play stupidly aggressive into colossal matchups, where you basically stay glued to their ass and chip away at them at every given opportunity without the risk of getting hit back in return. It's really kind of funny because so many people complain about how difficult it is to beat a Colossus Sword user. But then you just pull out a little kitchen knife and all of a sudden there's nothing they can do with that big fucking...
Wrong and thrusting you are, just thrusting. Repeatedly over and over again. Body was so hot that he had to marry himself about it. Forever. It's okay. Strong, ripped, thick body. Oh.
And then there's the matchup against Crouch Vortex setups. Certain setups like 2-Cat and PSGS, Two-Handed Great Spears, and Uggs all generally have really poor standing attacks and heavily rely on their crouching and rolling attacks to deal their damage. It's generally pretty difficult to get in close against something like PSGS without risking a trade. But with an offhand dagger, you can just roll their hit, get your chip, and roll back out before they can attempt to punish with another crouch poke. Once you have their poise chipped, then it's really easy to keep up aggression and threaten a poise break, since they will always have to recycle back through their crouch state before they can go for another attack. But this is all just with the offhand dagger on its own. When paired with certain setups, it becomes so much more threatening. While offdaggers naturally counter these slower weapons, it happens to pair with them really nicely. A main hand halberd paired with an offhand dagger is arguably one of the best pairings, where you can go for the standing R1 and it will true combo into an offhand dagger. If the opponent has less than 103 poise, then against non-hyper armor setups, it's always safe for you to go from the R1 with a halberd into 3 off-dagger hits in a row before the opponent can mash into you. I really like this setup on a bleed build because for the majority of cases, the combination of an R1 from the halberd into 3 off-dagger hits will deal something around 380 bleed buildup, meaning if the opponent has under 103 poise, then you can stun them first with the halberd, get the true combo with the off-dagger, the next hit will break their poise, and then the hit after that will cause a bleed proc, and since the bleed proc doesn't reset the poise damage, then you can then go for a 4th off-dagger hit to stun them again, and finally get a 5th hit for free, while still being able to roll out unpunished, if they're still even alive. Granted, this only really applies as long as they keep trying to mash into you, but based on my experience, everyone mashes. So it's up to you to be on top of your poise counting and your status counting so that you know when it's safe to keep up the pressure. Colossal swords also have this same interaction, where after you land a crouch R1, then it can true combo into the off-dagger, then keep prio for 2 more hits if they try and mash out without hyper armor. In this case though, if they try and panic roll away after landing your off-dagger hit, then you can follow it up with an R1 from your Colossal Sword again to roll catch them on the way out. This makes the Colossal Offdagger the best matchup into opposing hyper armor setups, where either you can play it really safe by just chipping away at them with offhand attacks, or you can secure your true combo from the crouch R1 into the off-dagger attack. Some other great setups that pair well with the offhand dagger are things like whips, greatswords, scythes, curved greatswords, each of which can land an R1 into a true combo with the offhand dagger, and if the opponent panic rolls away from the off-dagger, then it will cause them to get roll caught by a follow-up R1. You can then rinse and repeat this as long as they continue to panic roll. But in all cases, just having the offhand dagger provides an otherwise slow and clunky setup a very fast and unreactable attack. Overall, daggers make for exceptional tools as offhand weapons and can completely annihilate certain matchups. But now let's go over and talk about how they function as a main hand weapon, starting with a single slashing moveset of the Quesadilla and the Wakizashi. These types of daggers are best used one-handed, as their one-handed moveset comes with a significantly greater amount of range on their attacks compared to the two-handed counterpart. But what makes this dagger different from others is that the R2s of this weapon come out fast enough that they can even prevent hyper armor weapons from being able to mash out a hit stun to interrupt your attacks. After landing a hit with the first R2 of the dagger, the second is always safe to go for, so the only response that your opponent really has is to try and get away. This really opens up the door for some serious mind games. With the follow-up R2 being guaranteed, you can instead opt to predict that your opponent will have the sense to roll and get away, and line yourself up to land a roll catch. You can do this by using something like a hit from the offhand hand axe after the initial R2, which has a lot more range than what the dagger has to offer, and sets you up to continue your string of attacks by following up with more R2s. Otherwise, you can use something like a shield in your offhand and do something called a block cancel. If you look at the frame data for these attacks, there's various cancel windows at different parts of the animation. The cancel window for the guard comes much earlier than the cancel window into movement, so bringing up your guard after landing a hit and holding sprint lets you cancel out of the animation faster than it would be for you to just try and walk forward. This allows you to stay on top of that opponent a lot better, and position yourself to roll catch them as they try and get away. Each time that you block cancel an R2 to stay on top of the opponent, you then continue to threaten the potential backswing, meaning that they have to respect your priority and continue to play defensively as to avoid getting blendered. The main flaw of this setup is that it really lacks any form of chase down. Your running attacks are terrible, deal negligible amounts of poise damage, and have really high recovery. And your jumping R2 is extremely high commitment with little reward. Your best features with this weapon really are just the standing R1s and the R2s. So, if someone is playing keep out and just runs away from you constantly, then you're going to have very little way of actually keeping up to them. Like greatswords in particular are damn near impossible to whiff punish due to their insane range, fast backswings, and have high poise damage. And on top of that, light greatswords have a weird little quirk where they will actually push you away from them every time that they land a hit on you. So if a light greatsword player comes up against a dagger player and just mashes R2, then it's unlikely that the dagger player will ever even get close enough to land a hit on them. In cases like this, I'd recommend swapping either to a different setup altogether, or trying throwing on something like an offhand halberd. Offhand halberds have weirdly awesome synergies with this type of dagger. Not only does it compensate for the dagger's lack of innate range, but it also has its own built-in true combo. With this setup, you can true combo a hit from the offbird into an R2 from your main hand dagger. After you land your true combo, then you can go for another offbird hit, which will roll catch them if they try and panic roll away, and if they're still close enough, then you can land another true combo with your R2. Otherwise, the other best options for this are to either run a shield or the hand axe in your offhand. The shield I already talked about earlier, but in my opinion, the offhand hand axe provides even more to this setup than any other option. The hand axe gives you an insane amount of priority against smash, where if you land a hit with a hand axe, then follow it up into an R2 from the dagger, it'll keep priority. Your second R2 then still keeps priority, letting you go for 3 consecutive attacks without the risk of getting mashed into. There's one really odd and hyper-specific interaction that tends to happen a lot with this type of dagger, where if you knock someone down from a jump on the first R2, then the second will just go straight over their head, because the knockdown animation puts their head down so low that you end up missing. It's just a really annoying little thing that sometimes you should look out for. To summarize, this class of dagger really benefits from its one-handed R2s, which come out fast enough in succession that they can keep priority between the first and second slash. The threat of the R2 backswing allows you to incorporate mix-ups into your gameplay to keep the opponent off balance, as they try and guess whether or not you'll keep them locked down with the R2s, or if you'll mix things up and aim for a roll catch. In any case, it's important to remember that you still have your standing R1 moveset available on the weapon, and you can always just make use of it the same way that you would with an offhand dagger. Against big hyper armor weapons where it's generally unsafe to try and punish their attacks with your R2s, instead, you'll want to use your safe chip damage with your R1s at every given opportunity, in order to condition them to start rolling to get away from your free hits. This conditioning is what sets you up to have safer opportunities to commit to your R2 combos. The Misericord variant of the Dagger moveset has only a few options to pick from, but far and above the rest is the main gouge, for one very simple reason: size matters. The main gouge has a fucked up hitbox that's way bigger than it's ever meant to be. I'm talking length and girth. If we compare it against the Misericord, which is the second longest amongst this class of dagger, you can pretty clearly see that massive difference between these two weapons. The only downside is that the Misericord does a bit more damage. So if you're really looking to maximize your damage with this setup, and don't necessarily care about the range, then the Misericord is still a viable option. That said, I played with both of these weapons pretty extensively, and can honestly say that the difference in the range is significant, like a lot. It is worth noting that the main gouge, much like every other weapon in the DLC, is bugged, and the one-handed R2s of this weapon deal slash damage instead of pierce. I couldn't even tell you how they managed to fuck that up, but all it really means is that you don't get counter hit damage bonus when you're using the one-handed moveset. These weapons play a lot differently than their slashing dagger counterparts, since the second R2s of this moveset are pretty utterly fucking pathetic. However, these weapons work exceptionally well being either one or two-handed, but my biggest recommendation would be to alternate between the one and two-handed movesets. Allow me to explain. In the PvP community, we have something called handy tech, which is simply the act of toggling between one or two-handing your weapon, or otherwise just swapping it to something else. Doing so allows you to use the switch weapon cancel window, similar to how you would normally use a block cancel window. With this, anytime that you toggle or soft swap a weapon while you're holding sprint, your character will accelerate to maximum sprinting speed automatically, where it normally takes a few frames to be able to reach top speed. So this really enhances your control over your character's position, which in this case is absolutely essential for being able to outmaneuver your opponents. Now remember, you don't have a viable backswing with this weapon, so it's never worth going for the second R2. One alternative is that you just block cancel your attack into another R2, and especially against slow setups like great katanas or one-handed halberds, you can keep priority by perfectly executing the block cancels with the R2s. This takes really precise inputs and timings, and if you fuck it up, then you're getting punished really bad for it. But against opposing fast weapons like hand axes, curved swords, and thrusting swords, then the best that you can hope for from a block cancelled R2 is to trade into them if they mash out a hit stun. So particularly against those kinds of setups, it's beneficial for you to have an offhand weapon to support this setup. Once again, the off axe is the star candidate here. With this, you can land a hit with the offhand hand axe and safely follow it up with an R2 from the dagger. This setup combo is extremely strong into a lot of matchups, where something like Starfist, backhand blades, twin blades, great katanas, and light great swords all come out too slow to actually stop your combo of alternating between your R2 and your L1. However, against faster setups like curved swords and thrusting swords, that strategy still works to some extent, but there's a catch. With this setup, you will always keep prio against mash by going from the hand axe to the dagger R2. However, the reverse is only true if the opponent doesn't perfect mash. Perfect mash refers to the attempt to input an attack at the earliest possible frame out of hit stun. But even a single frame of delay will allow you to keep alternating between these two attacks. Otherwise, the safest thing for you to do instead is just to handy tech and get away. This really opens up the possibility for some fun and engaging gameplay, where you can handy tech between the attacks to keep it glued against your opponent and roll catch with the R2s, or use handy tech to outspace or strafe your opponent's attacks and outplay them at every interaction. It's a very technical kind of gameplay, but it is so much fun when you pull it off. And finally, we come to the last variant of Dagger, being the double slashing moveset of the Erdsteel Dagger. The main highlight of these daggers is their nuclear levels of damage. Each hit of the dagger has a damage motion value of 90, being 180 total. Compared to the other daggers, which only have 120 motion value, this means that the base damage that you deal with these weapons is 50% higher than what you can even achieve with the other setups. These daggers work something as a hybrid between single slash daggers and thrusting daggers. Similar to the Misericord moveset, the one and two-handed R2s are pretty much identical, except that the recovery from the first into the second R2s of the one-handed moveset are a lot faster when compared to the second. When one-handing this setup, it is safe for you to go for the follow-up R2s with this weapon against non-hyper armor setups, so long as you break the opponent's poise on the second hit of the R2. And this is where we get back into poise counting. If you were to chip the opponent's poise, causing them to get poise broken on the first hit of the R2, then they'll be able to mash up a hit stun and interrupt your follow-up. However, this is never the case with a two-handed moveset. The increased recovery time that it takes to go for follow-up R2s when two-handing prevents you from keeping priority against mash with this setup. But when it comes to the matchup against hyper armor, all of this just kind of falls apart. Against hyper armor, it is no longer safe for you to use the R2 combo with one-handed moveset, because the opponent's hyper armor will start up too fast to stop their mash, unless they have under 70 poise. At under 70 poise, both hits of the dagger's R2 will break their poise and they'll no longer be able to get into hyper armor frames fast enough to stop your combo. All that to say that high risk equals high reward. If you do manage to land your combo, then it's going to do a lot of fucking damage. But between poor tracking and all the poise counting, these weapons can be sort of a headache to make useful. The standard strength build can make really effective use of any of the various dagger movesets, with the most notable one being the single slashing moveset. The dagger with the highest base AR on a strength build is the Quesadilla, reaching over 470 AR at 80 strength. The only downside is that this weapon can't be buffed. Alternatively, a heavy infused wakizashi only reaches 440 AR, but it can be buffed with drawstring grease. With greases, the waki will do roughly 20 more damage than what you can do with a Quesadilla. Strength builds can also make really effective use of the Fire Knight short sword. This works best being fire infused while buffing with Flaming Strike. You can also buff this with Flame Grant Me Strength, which at 80 Strength and 15 Faith will bring your AR with this setup to something around 550. However, this weapon can easily stack up the multi-hit damage buffs from the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis, letting you get that number even a lot higher. Next builds can make really good use of the Slashing Wakizashi moveset or the Thrusting moveset of the main Gouge. A build at 80 dex will generally have around 20 AR with these weapons more compared to that of an 80 strength build. However, this comes at the cost of lower defenses. Your flat defenses scale with your stat investment, and the strength stat contributes greatly to physical defenses. You will still get some amount of defenses by investing into dex, but the difference is pretty significant. So whether you go strength or dex really just depends on whether you want to push your damage or if you want to push up your survivability. Arcane builds work exceptionally well with daggers in general, given by the fact that you can simply roll catch on reaction with a regular R1. The pressure applied by status buildups can also create unique circumstances where you can keep priority by continuing to swing with the dagger, so long as you're able to keep track of your status buildup. The Wakizashi and an Occult Infusion reaches something around 450 AR, making it pretty comparable to strength. The main downside being that you can't buff weapons that are occult or bleed infused, outside of some Ashes of War like Poisonous Mist and Seppuku. That said, it's pretty easy to get damage boosted from these attacks by securing a bleed proc and all the various damage boosting effects that come with bleed, including Lord of the Blood's Exaltation, the White Mask, and Sacred Bloody Flesh. Between Intelligence and Faith builds, Intelligence doesn't really have any particular niche with these weapons. You could sure throw on a Magic Infusion on a dagger and, it'll work, but what's more interesting is the topic of Faith builds. Faith builds make particularly great use of the Earthsteel Dagger. A Sacred Infused Earthsteel Dagger with Sacred Blade reaches upwards of 650 AR, but it gets even better. You can additionally buff this with two other weapons, being the Golden Epitaph and Sword of Light. With these three buffs, the AR on this dagger reaches over 830. The only downside with using this weapon is that in Elden Ring, holy damage is bugged, and it can't be boosted by indirect damage boosting effects like Shard of Alexander and Axe Talisman, but otherwise this still works fine with other damage boosting effects like the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis. If you're wondering about the viability between the Earthsteel versus the Fire Knight short sword, Earthsteel is pretty much always better, because the damage is just so much higher. You could probably achieve similar levels of damage if you use something like the Oil tier and the Fire tier in your Physic Flask, but with the environmental effects like water being on the ground or rain decreasing your effectiveness of fire damage by significant amounts, Earthsteel is pretty much always better between these two options. Daggers enable a playstyle in Elden Ring that allows you to be absurdly aggressive with minimal risk. Your low recovery on your attacks and high priority on your R2s has a solution for every problem, whether you're dealing with someone with hyper armor, a wiggling floor-humping double chopstick user. If you play your matchup correctly, manage good spacing, have good roll discipline, then dagger setups are some of the best weapons in the entire game. There's a lot of gimmick setups in Elden Ring, things that require your opponent to make mistakes in order for that weapon to work well. But as soon as you encounter a player that knows your tricks, then your game plan sort of falls apart. It's a lot of fun to land big silly one-shot combos, but if the other guy just doesn't walk into your bullshit, then you're sort of just dead in the water. Daggers, on the other hand, allow you to play well and become even more effective the better that you play, rather than relying on your opponent to just be bad at the game. It takes a lot of time and effort to use these setups effectively, but when you do, there's very few things that can even come close to how strong these setups can be. So give it a shot. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.